Previously on Project Odyssey.
Are you ready on your side? We are. The device is fully functional. Bill has been quite helpful.
So what do you make of that second transmission from the other side that we just saw?
Judging by the readings we're getting from the satellite at Eve, I'd say they are using gravity wells to open wormholes.
Raptor 1 has gone through.
2, 1, activate. Alright, you two take the side door, I'll keep Bill with me, and we'll get in there and get them before they know what happened.
And now the continuation of Project Odyssey.
Alright, Bill says this is it, Kerbin's office. We can take him and get access to the main computer at the same time, and once we have that, we have the base. Take the room like we planned. You're ready for this? On my mark. In 3, 2, 1, go! I don't get it. Why's the room empty? Bill, you said they'd be here. You said the main computer would be on. Hey, what's going on? You're Komalak, I take it? Who is that?
My name is Kerbin. Welcome to my base. So the readings confirm it. The other side is coming here.
Yes, sir. This gravity well and these anomaly spikes are completely unnatural.
Call up to the station. Let them know to be ready. Jeb, are the failures connected to the other side?
I think so, yes. Kessler's instruments say a large wormhole is opening.
Alright, get your whole crew back here now. We don't know what they're going to do.
Alright, packing up and leaving now.
How about Neil and Hadfield? Will they be back in time?
Yes, they started back a couple days ago, and should be here before the other side arrives.
Well, okay then. It looks like we'll be ready for this Komalak that Svetlana's been talking about.
Greetings, Kerbinauts! This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is episode number 39 of Project Odyssey. And as you just saw, Neil and Hadfield are supposedly on their way back to Kerbin right now. So if we go back in time just a little bit, we can see what they were talking about. They said they had already left. Well, this is what it looked like when they were leaving. After setting up a maneuver node that would allow them to know where to make the burn to come back here, a retrograde burn going in the opposite direction that the moon is traveling, that's what's going to get you back to Kerbin. They then flipped themselves around to make sure they'd be pointing in the proper direction when that time came. Then just started up the engines until they reached escape velocity relative to the moon, and then kept them going until the periapsis of that return orbit ducked down just inside the atmosphere. From that point, of course, we knew we were going to be able to make our aero capture to get back home. However, after getting back into the orbit around Kerbin, it was decided they wanted to bring it up just a little bit. So an extra maneuver was made to just go skimming through the upper atmosphere. Because what we really want to do is try to bring the capsule down very close to the KSC, and if we can do that, then we don't have to go far, far away to bring them all home again once they've splashed down. Since the capsule has retro engines and legs, it's supposed to be able to make a soft landing right at the launch pad of the KSC, returning home from where they came. However, if you remember in a previous episode, we had an issue with two things. One, the trajectories mod that was telling us where we were going to come down, and two, the parachutes. They didn't seem to work correctly once we got close to the ground. So we're going to keep an eye on both of those things this time around. One fan had taken a guess and said that maybe after the capsule had decoupled last time, the trajectories mod realized that the aerodynamics were slightly different, and so it maybe had recalculated where I was going to come down without me noticing that that had happened, because at that point I had switched away from that map view. So this time what we're going to do is put the X exactly where we want it. Then we will decouple the capsule and take a look again at the map to see if it really did change. Also, what I'll do is use the retro engines on the capsule after decoupling to fine-tune it to put it exactly where I want, and then we'll watch to see if it changes as we start to go through the air. It's not supposed to if it's working correctly. You can see that we've placed ourselves really close to the KSC there, after a slight burn to bring us back north just enough to get us there at the KSC. Then after that, we'll decouple and watch for the service module to drift away, making sure that it's very clear of our capsule so we don't collide with it before we do any other maneuvers. After that, we'll do the fine-tuning that I was talking about, but we'll have the heat shield facing in the direction that it's supposed to be facing, so essentially, this is how it's going to come down aerodynamically now. The trajectories mod should be able to tell the orientation of the capsule and how it's going to be affected, right? So one more small maneuver to put that X pretty much right next to the KSC's red dot. The red dot's actually coming from the remote tech mod, of course. So with the X near the dot, I now keep switching in and out of looking at the capsule view and looking at the map view to see what's happening as we go through the air. And what we can see is, with no further input from me, as the air drags on us, the X is moving across Africa. So sure enough, last episode when it happened to me then and I didn't come down where the X had shown, it wasn't some strange fluke. It definitely was operating the way that I thought that it was. The X continues to move across Africa until eventually it's in the water on the far side. So it looks like we're going to be taking quite the trip in our little boat to go pick up this crew. We'll head down around the Horn and come up the other side, pick them up and head back. Fortunately, the boat moves very fast. And we'll ignore the fact that this probably throws a little monkey wrench into the idea of having everybody return home before the large wormhole finishes opening for the enemy ship to come through. So after some standard and uneventful re-entry heating and then coming down on the chutes, we hit a little snag. The game crashed at essentially the point where the chutes were supposed to open up the main chutes. Only the drogues had been open and the main chutes had been only partially deployed. I reloaded and tried again, but the same thing happened at about the same point, even though the second time around my target was closer to the KSC. My solution at that point was to simply pretend that it had succeeded, terminate the flight instead, and then unmark the personnel as having been MIA from the termination. I'm sure they would have made it to the ground just fine, and been picked up and brought home also just fine. Now, if you will remember back in the little commentary by our Kerbals at the beginning, they said that the crew up at Odyssey Station was also being requested to come home. So here we are checking in with the crew. They have finished wrapping everything up that they were doing on the station because for the most part, this is sort of the day they were waiting for anyway. Then they gathered the things they wanted to bring back, headed over, hopped into their capsule, decoupled from the station, and started drifting slowly away to the point where they'd be able to begin some sort of return maneuver. But first things first, we had decoupled without the KSC directly under us. This will allow the capsule to move far enough away from the station that the slower speed that the game moves where two things are close together like that will be alleviated, and then we can fast forward without worrying about that little slowdown. Try to get the KSC's red dot closer to where we're going to be coming down relative to our current orbit, and then make the maneuver that's going to get us back. And this time around, we're going to assume that it'll back up a bit, so the X has been placed out in the ocean near KSC. We should also be coming down faster, higher G-forces, but hopefully less time for the capsule to get off course too. The only place that we can come down is somewhere between where the red starts and where the X ends. There's no way it can be earlier than that or further from that. So knowing that we're coming down on that red line somewhere, we can be fairly confident that this ship will be able to pick up our crew in a reasonable amount of time. But guess what happened when the chutes got near the ground? So On that one, I didn't even bother trying to reload. We just terminated that flight, pretended they made it back without the game crashing when the chutes opened, and moved on to the next thing. And the next thing for us here on Project Odyssey is we're going to check in with that capsule that's bringing back Hadfield's medicine. Technically, that has already occurred. It got back shortly before Hadfield's return. I just showed them to you out of order because in the interlude at the beginning, they had talked about Hadfield returning, so I wanted to show that. But now we'll see what happened on the entire mission that brought back Hadfield's cure. This part of the adventure you see when I threw up that little back in episode 18 thing there began a long time ago. Here we are on episode 39, and it was on 18 when we first sent an attempt to go to Jewel. However, we did have that issue with the game that caused us to essentially reboot. So that mission had to start over again once we got to episode 30. In real time, that was several months ago, but not as bad as 18 was. 18 was almost a year ago, but we finally got the mission going again here in 30, sending it up on 2 very large radial boosters that we dropped off on the way up, of course. The payload itself looked a lot like the one that we were going to send back in 18, but technically it was a totally different payload. The launch from 18 had some RTGs on it to power it, but this one had gigantic solar panels. Both of them had some long-range communication, although 18 had an engine on it. This one only has a docking port because we're going to recapture it when it gets back to Kerbin. In both cases, there was a shielded cargo bay-like area and a little scoop. Technically, you never got to see the scoop in 18, but the interior is pretty much the same as it would have been in 18. It had the cargo bay and the scoop was on an arm that can extend out from inside. That way, when we're passing through the atmosphere of Jewel, the scoop can grab some of that atmosphere, close back up, pull the arm back inside, and then head back to Kerbin. After that, a few episodes went by where we assumed that it was doing its long-range travel in between Jewel and back to Kerbin again, but by episode 37, we were required to get ready for its return, so we first sent up a couple of launches here. One of them a standard interplanetary transfer stage with 3 nuclear engines, and one of them a single nuclear engine return stage designed specifically for this mission. After both of those were in orbit around Kerbin, we rendezvoused the 2 of them together and docked them up using a little space tug that was like a miniature version size space tug as the same kind that we use at Odyssey Station. That space tug was intended to go out and take the return vessel from Jewel, dock to it, drag it back to the return stage, dock again, and then make its return. But in order to make sure that we wouldn't be flip-flopping all over the place, it was assumed that we were going to need to strut these 2 parts together because the space tug in between them is probably not going to be strong enough. So if I remember correctly, it was Joseph who we sent up in a Hydra capsule to rendezvous with that docked vessel, head out there and do a little bit of strutting. There were 4 struts built into the one said the return capsule, well, the return vessel, return ship, you get what I'm saying. Strut that up and then jump ahead to episode 38. In other words, last episode, the one where we had begun the burn. The interplanetary stage was being used slowly but surely to edge our way closer to an escape velocity. I don't remember which one it was in, but there was a previous episode to even 38 where the Jewel return craft was already set up to go across the front of Kerbin. Its path isn't being rendered in this shot, but I'll turn that on in a moment and you'll see that path. What we're trying to do is get really close to escape velocity so that we won't have to worry about doing as much burning once we are ready to intercept the return craft from Jewel. This will save about 900 meters per second, and if we let ourselves flip out to the apoapsis and come back down again, as we go through the periapsis, we'll be going so much faster than if we had just been in a parking orbit around Kerbin, that our engines will be much more efficient. And so here we are now. As you saw a moment ago, I labeled this as episode 39. So this is our new stuff. And right here you can see this is the path where the jewel craft is coming back, and we're going up and around this orbit here, allowing us to rendezvous with that vessel as it comes across the front of Kerbin right there. So since the jewel craft has almost nothing left in the fuel tanks, it's running on fumes, and because we need access to that docking port, it is time to finally decouple. You can see Kerbin in the distance there, so yeah, we're getting close now. We'll just close up our communications antenna because we are close enough to Kerbin that we can use our longer range antenna itself, and we don't need that giant dish anymore. Alright, so now we have jumped ahead, quite a bit ahead, because it took a while for that burn. We're on an escape trajectory and we're rendezvousing with the jewel return craft. It's not very far away from us. We no longer need the transfer stage that sent us on our escape velocity. So we decouple that, and then we decouple the space tug so that we can go over to the jewel return and grab it. At least that's what I thought was happening. You can see it over there on the left. That's it, right? So I target that and I start heading over that way. But here, listen to this. You hear this sound? What do you think that sound is? That would be the sound of me slapping my forehead facepalm style. And that would be the exact same sound that if this had been live, you would have been hearing when I reached the jewel return vessel, because look, there it is right now. Except, no, that's not it right now. I targeted the wrong thing. The real jewel return is over there on the other side. That's the save Hadfield. So I'm going to flip myself around rather than realigning which docking port I'm using and flipping the engines to be the other side. Instead, I'm just turning around, although initially activating the wrong engines anyway and almost crashing into the wrong side of the jewel return. But the space tug is very maneuverable. In fact, that's the whole point of using the space tug, to do all of this. So I was able to avoid hitting it just by throttling up to full, getting pointed in the right direction, and then heading over to the proper part that we're trying to locate here, the actual save Hadfield, at which point we can just rotate this and grab whatever side docking port we want. And for this docking, I'll just take the one that I was heading towards, since that's the side I had already assigned as control from here. The only thing that's worrying me about that detour to the wrong spacecraft over there for a moment was that this means we're getting ever further away from Kerbin. The jewel return was on an escape trajectory. It was just going across the front of Kerbin, and it was heading back out into a solar orbit, which means once we dock up and get this over to our return stage, we have to reverse thrust to recapture our orbit at Kerbin. But because we're also so far away from Kerbin now, that means that we'll practically be spending about as much delta V as our actual orbital velocity relative to Kerbin right now. So for example, suppose we're going 6,000 meters per second relative to Kerbin. It's possible that we'll need nearly 6,000 meters per second for our capture. There is no benefit from the Oberth effect on this one. And the longer we go, the further we get from Kerbin, and the worse it's going to be, which is now why I'm worried about whether or not I packed enough delta V on this craft in order to get home. If we had not taken that detour to the wrong ship there for a moment, I had planned out that we should have been able to do it with that, but minutes have gone by. At 6,000 meters per second, or whatever the velocity was at this point, we're many, many more kilometers away from Kerbin now. So after activating the nuclear engine on the back and deactivating the little engines on the space tug, followed by crossing my fingers, we begin powering up the nuclear engine just a little bit at the beginning while we get ourselves pointed in the right direction, and then a little bit more, until finally we're full throttle. And at this point, it's just how long is it going to take before the burn is done. We'll check in with this later, even though technically this has happened already. Check in later because this is a really long burn, and we had left off the story where Komalak had made it to the ground, but found nobody waiting in Krantz's office. So let's return to what happened on the base just 5 hours ago.
Alright, we'll get this started as soon as Hadfield's here. He's finishing up with a treatment at the med lab. The topic we'll be discussing... here's Hadfield, please sit. I was saying the topic we'll be discussing is what to do about Komalak and the alternate dimension ship. A few hours ago, a large disturbance was detected by the sensors at Eve, and a wormhole is opening here at Kerbin. We know because it blew out some sensors on Odyssey station. Jebediah got them repaired and focused on the anomaly, and it's definitely Kerbal made. We now know this means their ship is finally coming through. Obviously, they have superior technology to ours, and Svetlana says they have no intention of sharing.
I shared what I know because you promised my people would not be hurt.
That's right, we're going to spend the next 5 hours that we have left before they come through devising our defense strategy. With Svetlana's help, we should be able to predict their actions and account for all contingencies. Then, it's a matter of setting things up so they don't know what we've done and make sure we can take them by surprise and without bloodshed. So, let's get to work.
They'll probably head straight for Kranz's office.
I think we should set up some knockout gas.
We'll also want to fake some life signs readings from Odyssey Station so they don't know we've left yet.
Alrighty, let's check in with the Jewel return, which technically happened in the past. It was such a very long burn that I'm going to speed this up to 16 times its normal speed, and you can see even at that rate, the orbit is barely changing. We'll know that we have recaptured, or at least we're closer to recapturing, once the orbit that we're watching on the Jewel return craft starts to look an awful lot like the orbit of Kerbin. Once it gets really, really close to looking the same, that means we're almost back to capturing at Kerbin, almost at escape velocity. At that point, I will want to zoom in and take a look at the capture just to make sure that we stop only right after the capture itself. After that, I'm going to want to go up to our apoapsis so that we can change the return trajectory, making sure that the periapsis is only just inside the atmosphere, and thus making sure that the G-forces upon re-entry are not too extreme. Take a look at the amount of hydrogen we had left there. Some of it is evaporating as we continue up to the periapsis, but we won't need the hydrogen anymore. We only needed it for the capture and the nuclear engines. But you can see before it ran out from just evaporation just now, we had come very close to not having enough. So that detour over to the wrong craft earlier almost was disastrous, but it turns out we're okay. Since we've decoupled from the nuclear engine and its stage, which was actually empty of hydrogen anyway, we'll be using the little engines on our mini space tug in order to bring the orbit of this thing back up into the lower atmosphere rather than just smashing into the planet, which would have generated those high G-forces I mentioned earlier. Then do a bit of fast forwarding until we can get into a position to make sure that our heat shield is angled correctly toward our re-entry direction. Take one last look at it because this is it. This is the final journey back to Kerbin of our Jewel return, the Save Hadfield Jewel scoop. In the distance, you can see the moon zipping around Kerbin, and even further away, something else. Maybe that's another planet, probably another planet because it's moving so slow relative to us, so far away. But we're almost in position now, so slowing down to reactivate, use our hydrazine to flip ourselves around, go heat shield first, and then speed back up again, warp into position, until we can get to the location where we'll bring in all of our solar panels. At this point, we have so much energy, we don't need to worry about the solar panels anymore, although I do expect at least the side ones to burn off on re-entry. They seem to stick out a bit past the heat shield. Oh boy, here it is, almost a year in the making, the medicine heading back to Kerbin, heating up on re-entry. Oh, there go the solar panels, just as anticipated. They were sticking too far out past the sides of the heat shield, so just as I thought, they heated up too much, although it looks like we have an antenna, couple antenna, dish and a regular antenna sticking out, but they seem to be surviving. I don't know how that's even possible, but It doesn't really matter as long as we can activate our chutes when we get closer to the ground. In fact, that time has arrived. We've gone through the worst of the re-entry heating and we're just coming down low enough where we can open up those chutes. Hopefully we won't get a crash like we did with our capsules. But we did. So we have reloaded from a quick save that was up in orbit and redone the entire re-entry. If the parachutes crash us when they open this time, that's it. We're just going to assume that it was successful, but it looks like we're doing okay, sort of, even though it appears we might be coming down a little too fast. No, 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 wait, oh, there it is. There's the capsule. Okay, well, any landing you can walk away with the medicine from is a good one. We'll take it. Alrighty, Kerbinauts. Until next time, I will see you later.
And both are coming in now.
Please state the nature of the medical emergency. Whoa, freaky.
Oh, right, computer. Disable EMH.
Okay, Hadfield, head over here to the chamber and we'll begin the treatments immediately. You'll be in there for a couple days, but when you get out, cured. Good as new.